Welcome to this week's episode of the Path Less Chosen podcast, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. I'm Sol.
I'm Jamie.
And today's guest is Neil. He is a chef on super yachts around the world. I actually met Neil in Nirvana in Bali. Hopefully Jamie will enjoy interacting with him.
Yeah, I'm always skeptical about you bringing on your friends from Bali, but this one does sound particularly cool. And my impression of the culinary world comes from purely watching Gordon Ramsay on TV. So hopefully he can shed some light on it. And I'm sure he's got some good stories. So I'm excited.
One person at a time to convince you it's the best place in the world. That's my aim. All right, without further ado, let's get him on.
Thank you very much for coming on, Neil. I think from what I've heard on the face of it, it sounds like a pretty sick job. But for the sake of myself and any listeners, just give us a quick summary then, what exactly it is you do.
Currently, I am a chef on board a super yacht. So I do 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off. We travel mostly around Mediterranean and then for winter season, the Caribbean. Apart from that, just those two places mostly, but still can't complain. They're pretty nice places to be.
I'm sure a lot of people are listening and thinking that's a pretty cool lifestyle, but why don't we jump right to the start of where you got into that? When did you realize it was something you enjoyed? Was it a hobby or was it something that you wanted to do as a job? How did that come about?
The honest answer here is it was the only thing I was good at, which does sound pretty random, but that is the truth of it. I was pretty good at home economics, more of the practical side than the written side. And I decided just on a whim to do work experience in a restaurant at age 15. So started out by doing work experience at school, really enjoyed it, felt like I fit in, and then decided we'll just keep that train going. Joined a culinary college in Birmingham, and then went straight out of there, straight into work.
So you say you did work experience at school. I think when I was that age, I had no interest in cooking whatsoever. I was just waiting for my mum or dad to put food on the table at night. But how did you discover that you like cooking? How did you get into it in the first place?
I'd say I always just enjoyed food. At that point as well, to be fair, there was a huge burst of cooking programs on TV. Became the fly on the wall TV shows like Hell's Kitchen came around. Enjoyed watching that. That was entertaining. And then it just seemed to me that when I did work experience in a restaurant, it seemed to be an environment that I fit into. And for me, it was I felt easy. I think that was the main thing. For example, my parents are in the medical field. So my dad's a doctor, my mum's a nurse. So a bit of a weird one that I became a chef and kind of against the grain. But they supported it because they knew I was enthusiastic about it. And the mentality was if you just put 100% in, full effort, then ultimately you'll be successful within that industry, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm exactly the same. Both my parents are in the medical field. What I found is telling them that I'm doing something that's maybe slightly unusual that they're not really aware of. They were quite cautious in asking me lots of questions about it and things. So when did your parents start taking it seriously that you might have a career as a cook, and how did you deal with that?
They were originally very apprehensive for sure, but then it was a Waitrose did a partnership with one of the colleges for a scholarship, and it just read really well. And I think my mum noticed it first, and she said, why don't you get involved in this? And so I did. And then application went through, interview process was all good, and then ended up going to culinary college.
Where do you learn this stuff before you go in? Were you learning purely from the TV shows, or were you teaching yourself? Purely
from TV, purely from school. That was it, just from the basics.
You're in culinary school. What are your other friends doing?
Yeah, everyone else went to uni and had a lot more fun. But then because I had I didn't have such a rigorous schedule as they did, I still kind of enjoyed that life because I just go visit them. So I would go up to Liverpool University, Leicester University, and I'd still live that life. So it wasn't too different from theirs.
Were you putting pressure on yourself at that point, to be able to balance a lifestyle whilst also pursuing this career, which is quite a competitive industry to get into?
No, because back then I didn't do too many hours. Really, from that age of 16 all the way till 19 till I first started work, I lived the best life. It was absolute carnage. But it was great because I got it in, because after when I started working, it was over. Did
you know that was coming at that point?
Yeah, it was definitely drilled into us at college that once you start work, you're going to be doing long hours. It's going to be 16, 17, 18 hour days. Forget about weekends, forget about holiday. Yeah, forget about all these events. You're never going to see them. Yeah.
Wow. Back then, did you start thinking, once you've gone to culinary college, where do you go next? How do you then get started and actually go into the industry?
That's quite a hard part, because Everyone's very apprehensive about taking people on, especially new people, because they'll leave when things get hard. Luckily, I started to make a good little network around the area of Birmingham. So I made friends who were working in a recruitment agency, and they helped me get a position up in the Lake District. So that was ideal. I think it was 3 Rosette place, 1 Michelin star at the time. So I got a good foot in, which was ideal.
How old were you then?
19.
Wow, that's a high pressure environment to start with.
Yeah, it was hardcore. Yeah. The head chef just rinsed one of the chefs and then told me, "Oh, it's never like this." Turns out it's like that every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I want to touch on that. Like, how is the pressure of being in a kitchen? I know it gets very Gordon Ramsay is famous for making it look awful. Is that a reality?
It used to be. When I first started, it was hardcore. Definitely, it was survival of the fittest. And some days in some of the restaurants, you just didn't know how it was going to go. It got physical sometimes. It certainly, decibels ran high as well. It was intense. And just dealing with that, you didn't really know any better. And you didn't know if there was another way out there. So it just was the norm. Or what you thought was normal. Definitely isn't normal. It's not good for you at all. That's just the way it went.
I'd love to know if there's any examples of stuff where you were like, "Oh my God, what have I got myself into?"
With 2 pieces of bread around the face.
I think my second job, the restaurant's now closed in Birmingham. So I think I can say this one. The head chef didn't like the way something was plated, and so he took a pan and then smashed the finished plate direct in front of me. And wow. I was like, "Holy shit, this is just nuts."
Wow.
They're 20 years old as well, so it's just crazy.
I was going to say, at that age, it must be in like particularly difficult. But I think for me as well, from the outside looking in, and I guess you do make these assumptions based on like the Ramsey shows on TV and stuff. But it seems to be exactly what you say, like it's a survival of the fittest, every man for himself kind of thing. But in most industries, I guess, when you go in as like a 19-year-old, 20-year-old starting out in an industry, you try and go in to learn from people. But what strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but how does it work in the culinary world? Because are people willing to like share their tips and tricks of how to make a like certain thing tasty, or does everyone try and keep it to themselves? Because how can you learn if people aren't willing to share? It seems very selfish.
So, like the kitchen dynamic, right? So there's different sections. You're going to have your fish, your meat section, your garde-manger starters, and the veg section. So then when you first start, you'll be working with someone who runs that section. And so they're going to try and teach you as much as possible. So the more you know, the more useful you are.
Right.
But where the clash is when it's section versus section, and then someone else tries to stitch you up, or you're trying to stitch them up. That's when it gets a bit weird. That's when the warfare happens.
How does that happen? The stitch up, like explain that.
Okay, so say the veg section, the garnish section, they need to cook carrots for whatever dish it may be, and they need to boil water for it. But then on the garde-manger side of things, they need to also use a pan of boiling water for something else. Well, they'll just move the garnishes off, so that pan's never boiling. And they'll put their one on there first. Little things like that, which is when you're running on such a tight time scale, and you start at 6 a.m. and you've got everything worked out. I'm going to have this done by this time by this time. And then by 11 o'clock, everything's done and sections get checked. Well, if one thing goes wrong, that you're kind of screwed the whole morning.
How do you build the confidence and aura to walk into a room like that and be the person that gets involved in that, just to make sure that you get what you're trying to achieve?
Because it's you versus them at the end of the day, and you don't want to be. We always had a thing that you just didn't want to be the first one to get caught out. Yeah. Because if one of the senior members of staff got you first, that's it. You're gone for the rest of the day. You're going to be in the crosshairs. As soon as you do something else wrong, that's it. The bollocking you're going to get is twice as bad as you would as you just made a mistake. So
wow, you describe all of that. Are there any points where you're like, "Fuck this, I'm getting out"?
Yeah, I'd say at that first restaurant I mentioned in Birmingham, there was one time in my entire career where I didn't come back into work. I did actually return, but not initially for the first week. He had flipped out. It was definitely probably after the time that the plate was smashed, and somehow ripped my fridge door off off the hinges.
Sure.
And I was like, I don't need to deal with this. This is crazy. And so then when my alarm went off on Tuesday morning, I was like, I can't physically bring myself to go back there. And in the end I did, but not for another week or so.
How did you end up going back? How did he persuade you?
Because all the head chefs, they always just try and push that thing where it's never personal. It's just about the guest experience. It's just about the food. So it's very difficult not to take it personally. I finished the task at hand.
There was clearly something that kept you in the industry. Yeah?
I'd say the fear of failure. Because I was away from home, I grew up in the West Midlands in Birmingham. I moved down to London to work in London as well. I never wanted to come back and say that I didn't make it. I wasn't able to do it, especially because London's like the hub for all the good restaurants. If you come back, then the level of restaurant is not the same. So then it would just been harder. So I felt like I had to make it work. And that's what kept me going.
Where did that mindset develop? Was it literally like the back is somewhere I don't want to be, so I have to keep going forward?
Yeah, back up against the wall kind of thing. Because of, like, you have in the chefing world, you know, the fine dining is like 1%. Everything else is, no offense, but like the Radisson, whatever it is, your hotels or restaurants, you got below that, you got all your fast food as well. And so you don't want to be anywhere near that, because everyone gets excited when they hear you're a chef, but you want to avoid all that. And you want to be able to like be proud of what you do as well. At no point was I ever not proud of the work I did. It was definitely at the highest level. And that's what you loved about it. So you just took the rough with the smooth, because that was the only way.
It seems like it takes a lot of like self-belief. You just had to go through those years thinking, you know, I know I'm good at this. I don't want to go back. I'm good enough to keep going.
On my notes on my phone, every time someone left, I'd write their name. And before you know it, when people three people started leaving in a week, for example, you have 40 names in no time. I think at least before a year, I had 40 names on the phone. And every time I added a name, I felt a little bit better that I was still there. 5 years down the road, I was the last one left. Wow. And I'll say I was never the best one. I was never the best chef in that restaurant, but I was the one who stuck it out the longest. And plenty more people came in who were way more talented, but they all left.
Wow.
You then took on another trend, which I guess wasn't such a big thing back then, is go off to California. How did you make that jump?
So why I decided to move over was to see something new, see different type of culture. I always loved America. So I thought the best thing for me to do is go to different bunch of restaurants, spend like a day, like intern. We call it stage in our field. And so I went to New York, did a couple of days in a restaurant there, went to Chicago, same thing, 2 different restaurants, 2 different days. Went over to California, up into Napa Valley, did about 4 or 5 days. In the end, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I had a great time.
At that age, you know, 26, it's when a lot of our friends make the decision, right, I'm going to settle down now. I'm going to go into London. I'm going to get a secure job and settle. And actually, that was the age that you decided, no, I'm going to take a big leap of faith, a bit of a risk. I guess you'd describe it as a risk to move somewhere and keep pursuing this dream. So I want to ask about your mindset in that time. How did you come to terms with the fact, like, yeah, I'm going to take a big leap of faith here?
Well, you want the badges of honor. Like, you want to have that strong resume, say, I've worked here for this person, I worked there, and just prove yourself again that you can do it. The hardest part about that, though, was adjusting to like their way of working. And sometimes when you start again, you have to learn their way and then retrain your brain. And then the mistakes get made. And then when you've been at a high level for so long, the mistakes get more and more annoying because you feel like you shouldn't make them. Obviously, it's natural, but I used to beat myself up massively about it. It was unacceptable, but every day try and be 1% better. That was the move. At the time, I moved over with my ex-girlfriend, and I used to sit in the corner of my room, and she said, I don't like to see you like this, you're just silent. And that's what I was just dwelling on a mistake all day long, and then how tomorrow I'm going to be better. So I used to write down, I had a small little notebook, I write down every single piece of equipment I needed, every single ingredient I needed, and the order in which I was going to do those things. So it was trying to take, like Formula One drivers trying to shave off milliseconds and other seconds just to trying to get their lap time down. That was my same mentality.
Love that.
After that, I then moved over to back Europe. And my thing at that point was I should try and get one more restaurant in before I returned back to London. Unfortunately, around that time, COVID happened. So that kind of just destroyed all the plans I had. Then with that became the chef shortage. So by the time I would have been head chef, I would have run my own restaurant, whatever it may be, I would have had to deal with the mistakes that the people above me, the people who came before me had made. So now I speak to my friends who are still in the industry, and they say they're struggling because they have to do more hours. And people, but just as a general, there is like for sure, I would have preferred to stay in restaurants. That was my home. I liked having a team. I liked the environment. But then I had to start weighing up what was going to work for me. Even when it comes down to money as well, if I stayed in London and if I was single, for example, it would have taken me at least 6 years to save up anything close to deposit on a house. And then even still, where's that house going to be in London? It's not going to be central. So then I'd have to travel to start work at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., finish at 11:30 at night. Not really worth it. So then I started looking at other options. And then the Alex Hormozi's solve rich people problems, get paid rich people prices.
Love that.
And I thought that's probably the move right now. Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck. And it's better to jump now and then wait.
I think the general message that I'm getting from the stuff that you've done and what you're saying is this whole leap of faith idea. Like, you're faced with some pretty difficult circumstances that are pretty impossible to predict, but yet you've made it work. So give us an idea then about what those next steps were when you started and how you then put that risk into action.
So similar, I guess, to when I started out in the chefing world, that I had to make this work. So when I got on board, the head chef was a temp, which was less than ideal. In 10 days, he left. So then I was on my own. Then it was a spontaneous boss trip, which started a couple of days later. So I had to try and navigate what was on the boat. I have to do a stock take, see what was going on. Couldn't roll into it blind. So I pulled like a 36-hour shift. It was absolutely absurd. But I was on my own. I had no other option, which was carnage, because when it came around and he was about to arrive for lunch, we'd just taken on this fresh fish and I was scaling it like a madman. And I've just come down the fish, and then one of the fish bones has gone straight into my finger. And it's gone like so deep, and it was huge. And so I'm like, great, now I have one hand, and it was unbelievably painful. And you just have to just accept the circumstances. Great, there is no other option. You just have to keep. That was a prime example. There is back up against the wall. There is no other option than to keep going. And then I tried to get one of the girls to take it out with tweezers. She couldn't see it. It was see-through. And then we had the captain come down and check it, and he was convinced it wasn't in there. And so we just left it. And then I just had to cook lunch service one-handed. And it turns out there was a bone in there. So it got infected within 24 hours. We're in the middle of nowhere in Greece. I've gone to the doctors, and honest to God, I've never been to a doctor's like it. It was just a shed. The reception desk and the doctor's bed were in the same room. And they said, it's too infected. You're going to have to take this antibiotics and then come back and we'll take it out in a few days' time.
Do you think what you did beforehand then, working in top restaurants, has prepared you for that kind of pressure, or was it totally different the way you had to handle yourself on a super yacht?
It definitely did. It definitely prepared me for it 100%. That's about things now, and I think it's just not necessary. Definitely not.
Tell us what a day-to-day life is like in that, on a yacht like that. What you wake up, make breakfast. I'm keen to hear. I don't think anyone will have any idea.
Say if you're guest on, then you'll start about 7 o'clock in the morning. It varies from boats to boats on the size, depending on your day-to-day. But for example, for the larger boats, you'll start in the morning. You'll get some prep done for the lunchtime, and then you'll have a breakfast service to contend with as well. Sometimes they can be hectic, sometimes not so much. It really depends. Say if the guests have had a big night out the day before, then if you make sure the breakfast special is something super simple and super easy, which is keen for hangovers, then probably everyone's going to order the same thing, and then it's going to be streamlined. You just got to work smarter, not harder. And then straight after that, you'll get back into the lunch prep. I noticed that in this world, the lunch times are way later. So your lunch service will commence around 2, 3, sometimes even 4 o'clock. And then dinner around 8, 9. Just depends on the kind of guest you have. Really, for when you have charter boats, that's when you're going to have a more hectic time. That's when you're going to have people who are there more for the good time, more to party, and then they're going to come back and they're going to say, I want chicken nuggets and chips at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I guess the caliber of people you're dealing with on these boats is slightly removed from maybe the norm, and I'm sure we're safe to talk about it because they probably won't listen to this. But do you feel like you have to pretend to be someone you're not? Do you have to fit into some kind of form that they're expecting of you? How does it work in terms of adapting to that lifestyle?
It varies on owner to owner and guest.
Yeah.
So for sure it could be difficult, but then you have to weigh it up, and you got to look at it like, is it worth my time and effort? You get paid more in the yachting world than you do as a chef on land. You're going to have more time off. You know that there's an end to it. So say if you've got a busy summer season and you've got a good rotation similar to what I have, 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off, then you know that the light at the end of the tunnel is only just there, compared to when you worked in a restaurant and you might not even get a holiday for a whole year. There is no break at the end of it. So that you know that you've just got to get over that hurdle.
Well, I was going to ask about that because you say about the light at the end of the tunnel, and I see you're sitting in a nice little place in Thailand. So that feels like the light at the end of the tunnel. You say how hectic and stressful it is while you're working, but tell us about your lifestyle in a more general sense of, year to year, month to month.
So I'll just try and have a very relaxed downtime, work on health and fitness as much as possible. I've noticed that, as you have a Whoop band, I have a Whoop band too. My HRV is abnormally low. So I'm trying, my HRV rolls are on an average of like 22, 23.
Wow.
So I see all these markers trying to improve sleep, years of having 3-4 hours sleep. That's no good. That's part of the reason why I'm back here in Thailand, is because I noticed that when I was here last year, but my sleep was fantastic. So I thought maybe we need to stay here for a little bit longer and then just dial it all in. So when I come out here, super healthy. I'm rural Thailand, so there's not a lot of you can't really go out, can't really drink. It's a dry camp anyway. All the meals are cooked for you, laundry's done for you. The training, you just wake up in the morning if you want to train, do yoga. Those are options for you. They're both run classes at 7 a.m. So you have all this just within walking distance. Ice baths too, daily massages, and all for probably less than you pay for a 1-bedroom flat in London. I looked at my situation when I first started. Once I was settled, how could I leverage this position to the best? How can I optimize it to the best position possible? So I left London. So I moved out of my apartment. So then I got rid of the rent. Great. So now we've reduced the living costs. And then coming out here, so then I've reduced the time I spend traveling compared to Bali, for example, reduced food costs compared to Bali as well. And it's given Bali as well is cheaper than Europe for sure. But that's why I went to Bali, went to Thailand, and just picked my favorite. And that way now I can save more money and then possibly eventually at some point buy a house in less than half the time. But I would have had to fucking save up back in London, which is just crazy.
How do you think, as someone who's been in a high pressure environment, someone who has to deal with a lot of shit on a day-to-day basis when you're working, how has good focus on your health affected you positively? I
think it kind of started because I started having health problems. So back in 2017, before I even left the UK for California, I developed a dairy and egg intolerance, which just happened because I was consuming so much of it. That's my understanding anyway. And actually similar as well for gluten intolerance too. So then I went to a bunch of doctors and tried to get that fixed. None of them helped at all. They just said it was IBS and basically deal with it. So then further down the line, I ran the allergy tests, and then I started to get a good understanding. Then did a microbiome test. They would tell you what you're missing. And that just started the health journey. That's where I just kept going. And I noticed that when I was working, started getting back pain. I just kept fit all the time, but I never ever did any stretching whatsoever. And so that has now become a fundamental part. Whenever I wake up before I start work, I'll do mobility before anything else. Sure, I'll try and get some strength work in or some cardio, but before anything else, it'll be resistance bands, trigger points, foam rollers, just trying to relieve the tension at hand. So
it sounds like you've got your professional lifestyle and then you've also got this healthy lifestyle in order. Where does it then fit in personal lifestyle where you do just have that downtime to chill with friends, or do you feel like when you're traveling and by yourself, you are totally content and that's your personal lifestyle?
I'd say I'm totally content at the moment. I think it's only been this year, not calendar year, but this year, that I've gone as far afield as Thailand and Indonesia. But usually what will happen is, depending on where I am situated with the yacht, so say, for example, it's for summer, I'll be in the Mediterranean, I'll be flown back to where, say, Birmingham, for example, I'll see friends, see family, and then I'll either fly out of Birmingham, or maybe I'll fly out to London, so then I'll head down. So it's just, I can balance it like that. Sometimes it's easier, like, for example, this point, I was in the Caribbean, I just flew directly from the Caribbean, stopped off in Paris, and then came to Bangkok.
We're all about, on this podcast, making sure that we speak about the negatives or the downsides. Would you say that is the big downside of what you do, is that you get these health retreats, you get the work on the yachts, it's great, but potentially that being a bit unsettled, not having friends necessarily all the way around, is that a negative, or can you deal with that?
Personally, I can deal with it, because it was, when you're a chef in a restaurant, you don't have that social routine. It's not compared to like my friends who'd hang out in the evenings after work, because we didn't have that. So that's not being an issue for me really at all. I don't see too many negatives with my current situation. I guess the only negative is that you live a suitcase, but you can choose not to. There's people I work with as well who will just go back to the same place every time. They have a house in Cambridge, for example, girlfriend, dog, they're settled. I would be happy doing it the next 10 years. I think after that, I think you'd struggle. I think after 10 years in the industry, you would like to be able to choose when you work. That's the ideal. But with the amount of money you could probably make in those 10 years, you should make it happen that you don't have to work as much. You should have other investments, you should have other assets, you should have other avenues of income.
What are you thinking in terms of career, or could it go in any direction right now?
For me, I'm very, very happy with this lifestyle. I wouldn't want to change. Now I could never go back. It's just not possible. I couldn't go from 180 days off in a year back to just weekends off. I could never do that. So I'm situated here I'm pretty happy until I've done 10 years in the yachting world. Now it's just a case of using my downtime to think of other ways to make the money work for me, try and gain other skills, investments, and that way have some sort of financial freedom.
And on that, I can hear my dad in the back of my head saying, the great lifestyle now, but financially, what's going to happen in 10, 15 years time? So are you making financial investments to gain that financial and time freedom soon? What's the plan financially there?
Currently, my whole thing last year was to dial in the health and fitness as much as possible, get a plan together, go to chiropractor, physio, PTs, all this stuff, so get a good foundation there. I've done that. The other thing was to find a new HQ. So then that's why I went to Thailand, Bali, decided Thailand's probably the best, but every now and then visit Bali as well, because it's just elite. There you can find physio, chiropractor, and PT all within a short distance. Here, not so much. So those things I got down. And the next thing was get involved, get your foot into as many doors as possible. So networking through different courses, different masterminds. So I joined a bunch of different ones, because now you have that expendable income that you can invest in yourself. You can either throw it into the stock market, throw it here or wherever. But then I thought, if I just try and surround myself by people who've done it before, who are smarter than me in these areas, and then just try and feed off that information and then just network that way. And so that's what I've started to do. So I probably joined about 5 different clubs, masterminds, courses in the last year. And then now I'm starting to gain momentum in a few of them. And I've already done some investments before. I did a penny stock investment and I got absolutely nailed. Stock twits and things like this. But then I need an expert to tell me, like, this is why it's happening. And what I've noticed recently is I would have definitely started to look at things, I would have probably sold off, and now it's gained massively recently. But you've had to get involved with people who read the data and understand the hows and whys of the market. And so it's definitely worthwhile doing. And there's obviously a system and a strategy, and they will inform you of what they're doing. Calls on the weekly, Slack group, things like this. It's really good. Really, really good.
So you mentioned you've started this in the last year. Do you wish this is something you've been doing for the last 10 years rather than just starting in the last year? Because it sounds like what you've achieved in this last year in terms of getting everything together is pretty impressive.
I think for sure everyone wishes they could have been involved in investments years gone by. It wasn't the mentality I grew up around. I never grew up with parents who talked about investments and things like this. Sure, ideally 10 years ago, if I started putting in £100 a month into the S&P 500 and kept that going, then we'd be looking really fucking good right now. Or if I put a load of money back into Bitcoin in 2016, we'd be looking really good too.
Yeah.
But that almost is invalid, because I've been pushed into this corner. If it wasn't for furlough was 50% of your salary, or around there, 60 or 50% of your salary. But my salary was made up of half salary and then half tips. So then when COVID came around, I was getting like a quarter of what I'd usually earn in a month. So I could barely pay for rent. And so, yeah, it was a wake-up call that you're poor, like double the average income of UK.
Yeah.
But it's still not enough. That pushed me into a corner of, I have to do something different here. I'm going to have to go. That's why it is kind of crazy to think I'm going right against the grain. Because for sure, the way the parents, everyone, they've done it, is to go traditional job, invest in the house, double investment on the house is for retirement funds, sell the house when we retire. That is not going to apply to me, and it's not going to apply to the people who are younger than me as well. That's not going to be an option.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'd rather gamble. I'd rather put my chips all on red and get really risky and it not work out, and I just keep going until something works, rather than play a safe bet and live a life of mediocrity.
So then, I know Sol sent it to you very last minute, and it's a long-winded one, but we ask the same question every time. So if you were to go back to the start, and it can be when you first started cooking or when you first started working in the restaurants, whichever time scale you want to put on it, one thing you do the same, one thing you do differently, and one thing that you tell yourself to motivate yourself.
The first thing I do the same is I would work in the same caliber of restaurants. I would never change that. From working in London, working in America, that built me up to be who I am today, for sure, with regards to like perseverance, motivation, and just getting the job done. Without that, I wouldn't be as successful. What would I change? I'd have to answer that when I get into the yacht world sooner. I should have just made the jump before. If I got in pre-COVID, I would have been laughing.
Yeah.
There's some people I know who took a full year's pay and didn't work a day. And that would have been, and those are like head chefs. That's like serious, that's six-figure money, easy. So that would have been the move. What's the last one again?
What would you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
It was a fear of failure. It was just that pride. I wouldn't add anything to that, because it was just, that was my thing. That was always the way it was.
Well, that's unreal. And you say in one of those negatives that you would have been laughing now, but I think you're sat in a retreat in Thailand.
It's not too bad. Yeah, you can't complain.
It's not too bad. And obviously, like, I get what you mean in terms of you can always look positively, but it sounds like you're living a good life, and you got it sorted. So thanks very much for coming on and sharing that, because I know there's a lot of takeaways to your industry, but also in general. So thanks very much. And I know it'd be very useful for people to listen to.
Okay, key takeaways. I like the whole way he went about, and he said it quite a few times, the old like leap of faith. Had the flat, he kind of had his life set up in London. Like he said at the end there, he'd much rather take that big risk and put a big bet on that doesn't work out, but then just keep trying until it does, rather than just settling with the mediocrity, which is what he kind of viewed, not seeing that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And he also made it sound like it was a risky bet, but he put logic to it. It was like, This is a risky bet, but it's not a stab in the dark. Like I know what I'm doing, but I just don't know if it will work out. And that, I guess, is a good takeaway. I guess my second one that I think was pretty good was he spoke about his mindset of like that story when he talked about writing down names on his notes of people who had left.
Yeah.
That perseverance to not fail, and the perseverance to keep going when people are falling around you. It's so cliche, but so many people would fall. I mean, all the people in his restaurant fell to the wayside. So having an unbreakable perseverance and knowing what you're doing, something that's going to lead to a good outcome, I think is my second takeaway. I don't know if you're about that.
Yeah, no, if you didn't have one, that's exactly the one I was going to say. What I found really interesting is that the way he phrased it was, this fear of failure was, he was so much in the mindset that he just had to make it. There was no option for him not to.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes you have to be quite careful with that, because you can't pile too much personal pressure on yourself, because then what happens if you don't make it? it was there as a motivating driving factor rather than something that was putting overwhelming pressure on himself. And as long as you can have the fear of failure to push you rather than to like scare you, then I think it's the best way to put it. So yeah, definitely that's a good second one. Do you want to go third or me?
Mate, you've got the list of 15. I reckon you've got a few more. You crack on with that one.
Okay, I think then slightly different from the mental mindset with the making it and taking risks then, but in terms of pushing yourself to be better, I quite liked, and he used the analogy of like a Formula One driver trying to achieve like the microseconds and milliseconds. I just loved that the way that even from such a young age, he knew he was in a competitive environment. He knew he was in something that's a lot of pressure, and to make it, you've got to be something special. And he would, every day he'd be thinking, how do I get those 1% better? And even he accepted that there was times where he was sat in the corner of his room miserable, and that's not the place you want to get to. But if you can have that driving force to be like, I'm going to make everything 1% better than it was yesterday, that is a healthy place to be in, as long as you do it in the right way.
Yeah, let's put that. So constantly making sure that you improve every day. Is that the way to summarize that?
Yeah, the 1%ers. I like that. And then the only one I was maybe debating between was the idea that you have to get everything kind of in order and plan your life nicely. Not as in terms of you don't have to plan for the future and everything, but just to make sure that you give yourself the best possible chance. Because he says that, he made a decision at the beginning of last year and he listed them all where he was going to prioritize his fitness. He was going to get his body in order. Then like the health side of things were going to take care of themselves. Then the professional side was, and then the personal does. And I think that idea of just prioritizing the right things and having it all in order then gives you the best chance to go and be successful in whatever you're doing, whether it's in the kitchen or otherwise. So maybe we could chuck that one in as well. But
I was going to say I'm back in the fourth one there, because to expand on that, I like the idea of what's important to you and then making a plan and working out how you're going to achieve that. I think he worked out exactly what he wanted and worked out how to get, as you say, his life in order to achieve that plan. So I like that. So why don't we be controversial to ourselves and stick in 4? So
I honestly think we've done well to get it down to 4, because I think there's a few things there that we could have easily mentioned, but hopefully just listening to it will come from that. But I'm sure everyone will have different takeaways.
100%. There's too many. So if you're all right with me to summarize, we'll go there with first takeaway, risky bet. Second, to say to have that make it mindset, but in a healthy way. Third, to be the 1%ers, the improvement of 1%. And then the fourth one to be to have a life plan, outline it, and then do it.
Yeah, I like it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Good episode. And hopefully people enjoyed listening to it. And we will be back next week.
And you're leaving me to say, follow us on social media and subscribe.
Yeah.
You need to stop leaving that to me.